Hi everyone, I'm here with Stanton Friedman. I'm deeply honored to have him as my guest. He's a very well-known nuclear physicist and a professional ufologist. He has lectured about UFOs at more than 600 colleges. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including Larry King. Stan was presented with Lifetime Achievement Award in England by UFO Magazine of the UK. His books Flying Saucers and Science was published in 2008, and he has co-authored several books including Science Was Wrong, as well as Facts, Fictions, and Flying Saucers. Hi, Stanton.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is really very special for me. It's a big opportunity. I really want to deeply thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
I know you have worked in UFO field for more than 40 years now.
Yes, I read my first book in 1958, gave my first lecture in 1967.
Can you share your observation on how the public opinion has evolved about this phenomena?
Well, fortunately, I have found that people have been responsive right from the start. I was very worried at my first lecture whether I would have a hard time, from the audience, especially since I was speaking to professional groups, sections of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. One of my early lectures was the Engineering Society of Detroit. People like this, these are no-nonsense people. They're not little old ladies in tennis shoes. And I was worried for the first year whether somebody was going to come up with something that would destroy my arguments. But it hasn't happened. And I judge, too, by the question and answer period. And I've only had 11 hecklers in over now 700 lectures. And so I must be doing something right, because you may get that many hecklers if you talk about sports, religion, politics, etc. So I'm urging people who want to speak up and speak out. It's okay. There are a couple of basic rules. You have to have your facts in hand before putting your mouth in gear, and don't make up any stories. Do your homework.
Have you had any personal UFO sighting or personal contact experience in your life?
No, I'm going to answer a phone just to say I'm not going to answer the person. Sorry, this is Stan Friedman. I'm doing an interview. Say that again.
Did you have a personal UFO sighting or a contact experience?
No, I never have. I've talked to loads of people who have. At the end of my lectures, I ask how many people here in the audience believe they've seen what I would describe as a flying saucer. And I say no names or anything. I just want to point and count so people understand they're not the only ones. Typically, it's 10% of my audience. But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. So sightings are common, reports are uncommon. I should add that as a nuclear physicist, I spent 14 years chasing neutrons and gamma rays. I never saw one. They're real too. We don't have to see something to believe that it's true.
And just to go through the basics of this phenomena, can you share your understanding on where these extraterrestrials are from?
Well, from off the Earth, interstellar travel. One of my lucky aspects of my background is that I worked on far-out propulsion systems for companies like GE and General Motors and Westinghouse, nuclear rockets, stuff like that. There are about 10,000 stars within 100 light years of here, and there's about 16,000 planets. So we don't need to say they're coming from other galaxies, and I never use the term intergalactic. I always talk about intragalactic, within the galaxy. I talk in terms of our local neighborhood, not other distant across the galaxy kind of things. After all, most of our travel is, down the street to go shopping and not across the continent or across the ocean to go visiting. But it does happen. So I'm perfectly satisfied that some UFOs, some underlined 25 times, are intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. Just like some isotopes are fissionable, very few, but just enough so we can build nuclear reactors. And so we have to take, the attitude that it's the ones that matter that we should worry about. Most sightings can be explained. Okay, we've said that. Forget about it. It's the ones that can't be, after careful investigation by competent investigators, on which we base our conclusion as to what's being observed. And look at the special characteristics we have. We're not talking about lights in the sky. I really don't care about lights in the sky. But when you see something, when people report something, groups of people report something with definite size, shape, surface texture, and behavior that indicates that we couldn't have built it because we can't build things that can go up, down, back, forth, silently, make right-angle turns, etc. If we could, we would. They make wonderful weapons delivery systems. On this planet this year, the military budget is $1 trillion. So it's clear we're concerned about advanced propulsion systems. And if we could build them, we would. And use them to threaten our neighbors, of course. That's the way we are as Earthlings. So also, I find no good objections to flying saucer reality. I find people who haven't studied the evidence. I mean, the basic objections are, there's no evidence, you can't get here from there, there'd be no reason to come here, silly arguments like these. There's loads of evidence, not only what people see with their eyeballs, but multiple witness radar visual cases. Physical trace cases. Ted Phillips in Missouri has collected more than 5,000 physical trace cases from 80 countries. These are cases where the object is seen on or near the ground, and after it leaves, one finds physical changes, the equivalent of burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks, footprints, that sort of stuff. So you have to take the totality, and also to recognize that from every government's viewpoint, they have the good equipment for monitoring flying saucers. I don't have a radar system. Call me and I'll go out and put my radar on. But all the governments do. And so it's very important to them to be able to identify intruders. And every large-scale scientific studies, in my lectures I usually talk about 5 or 6 of them, provide us with substantial cases that cannot be identified using data obtained by sophisticated systems that you and I don't have. I don't have my own radar. I don't have multiple witnesses with binoculars all standing, marking and looking. But every government is protecting its boundaries. Everybody's looking for strange things in the sky, but they have no need to tell the public what they're looking at and what they find.
And have you heard about actual physical evidence more than eyewitnesses, physical?
Yes, of course. A typical example, and I visited this site location many years ago, Delphos, Kansas. Ted Phillips, the guy who collects these close encounters, if you will, with the objects on the ground, he lived in the next state over, Missouri, as opposed to Kansas, and the sheriff had a report given to him by the Johnson family in Delphos. Ronnie Johnson, age 16, saw the object sitting just a foot or two off the ground, maybe 10 feet in diameter. And he stood there gawking at it, and then he couldn't move. He was paralyzed. The object took off slowly. He dashed into the house, told his mother that he had just been watching a flying saucer. She laughed. He said, "You don't need to believe me. Go outside and look." So she went outside. She did see it leaving. Then she over to where it had been on the ground. And there was a ring about 10 feet in outer diameter and 9 feet in inner diameter where the soil had been all dried out. And he dug down into the soil, the nearby soil, for a control sample, and the affected soil. And down 14 inches,
in the ring. The soil was dried out. And it wouldn't support plant growth for the next couple of years. Took samples of that and stuff. So Ted told me about it. I asked him to send me samples of the dirt. I called around to find the best soil testing laboratory. I was living in California, and they worry about testing soil that doesn't grow stuff because California is a very productive farming state, and you have to know what's wrong with the soil, what's missing, you know. So the soil wouldn't absorb moisture, and they said the level of soluble minerals, the soil was too salty, if you will, to support plant growth. That's a physical trace case. More than one person, the sheriff, the family called the sheriff, and he came out and looked at this and agreed that it was very strange. So there are thousands of such cases. There are the abduction cases, hundreds of those that we know about. There's an awful lot of evidence. And in my lectures, I typically talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies. And after each one, I describe the data in the study. How many people here have read this? And typically it's less than 2%. So I know that people haven't looked at the important evidence, the big studies. And look, as a physicist, you go to the summary reports, the big studies. You don't look at individual cases so much as the large picture. And we have a lot of data that most debunkers don't seem to want to deal with at all. And I have checked my audiences. And I, like I said, only had 11 hecklers, and 2 of them were drunk. So I know, and I've talked to as many as 2,000 people at once. So I've had a good sampling, all 50 states in the United States, all 10 Canadian provinces, and 19 other countries. So I get around.
And have you noticed a change in attitude among debunkers or skeptics over the time? Has that changed since you started?
Well, there have always been a very small percentage of nasty, noisy negativist people who say there's nothing to this. And I think the acceptance has certainly changed. I've had a good response right since my first lecture in 1967. Now, remember, I bring to the table being a nuclear physicist, working for major corporations, having collected tons of data. I've been to 20 archives, state archives, document archives, government archives. And so I've been digging for a long time. Most people have not. But I'd say I don't worry about it anymore. And in one audience, University of Manitoba, somebody in the question and answer period said, how about polling this audience? I had given the results of a Gallup poll, which showed there were more believers than non-believers, et cetera. And I said, well, I don't usually ask my audience to stick their necks out. That's my job. He said, well, I don't think they'd mind. Everybody clapped. So, okay, I asked 2 questions. I told them I would ask 2 questions. How many believe some UFOs are intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft? And the other question is, how many believe no UFOs are intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft? More than 90% said some were. That's pretty good. So that's one of the reasons I don't get a hard time. I say what other people are afraid to say because they don't know that it's okay to say it.
And there have been some experiencers have talked about different ET races, and they've also mentioned different races like Greys or Pleiadians. What is your understanding on that?
Well, there's no question that not all aliens are cookie cutter, that they're not all identical. There are a small number of categories into which almost all aliens fit. The little grays, the bigger ones, and there's a consistency. I have no reports of, beings with 4 arms or 6 legs or 5 eyes or anything. The science fiction writers have described lots of strange beings. And say, well, how could it be that visitors from afar look like us? We may have a common source. Earth may have been colonized a long time ago. Look, how many people live in North America now? Go back 400 years. We're darn few. Somebody came over here, settled in. Colonization, migration are the two major means distribution of intelligent life on planet Earth, like it or not. And so we have to look at it the same way. And that leads to the question, why would anybody care about coming here? Well, the major, you can think, I have listed in some of my papers loads of reasons. They're mining engineers. The Earth is the densest planet in the solar system. A cubic foot of Earth weighs more than a cubic foot of any of the other 8 or 9 planets in our solar system. That means more heavy metals. And heavy metals are rare in the universe. We know that from studying the spectra of stars. By heavy metals, I'm thinking of things like osmium, which is twice as dense as lead. People say heavy as lead. Lead isn't very heavy. Uranium, iridium, there are a number of these metals. And some of them have very special properties. 100 years ago, uranium was used as a yellow coloring agent for dinnerware. That's illegal now because it's radioactive. We didn't know about radioactivity back originally. So now uranium is used for nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors. And if I'd said those words 150 years ago, well, what are you talking about would be the answer. We didn't know anything about nuclear reactors. Nuclear fission wasn't actually discovered until 1938. The same with nuclear fusion, and yet almost all the energy in the universe is produced by nuclear fusion. People don't realize that. And why would aliens care what we do? We have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet since 1945. The first one at Trinity Site in New Mexico. Not too far from Roswell, which was the home of the only atomic bombing group in the entire world in 1947. So one reason for going to New Mexico, that's where the first atomic bomb was exploded. That's also where we had the organizations that fire rockets, White Sands Missile Ranges in New Mexico. It's the biggest military base in the United States. And so, getting back to the aliens, I assume every civilization is concerned about its own survival. That seems normal, And that means you got to worry about the guys with fancy weapons in the neighborhood. Well, any civilization like ours that has demonstrated its total disregard for human life, World War II, and I remember it, we killed 50 million of our own kind. 50 million people on Earth. We're not nice guys. We destroyed 1,700 cities. Aliens checking this place out, and then all these nuclear weapons we've exploded, would be concerned about us. Why? Because that nuclear fusion and nuclear fission would enable us to go out and bother our neighbors. Yes, it's a long way to stars. It's just like it took Magellan 3 years to go around the world, and his boat made it. He didn't make it. The space station does it in 90 minutes. Progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. So what I'm saying is, aliens certainly would be concerned about this civilization having its hands on a means for getting them to the next star over. To give you some example of what difference it makes if you have control of nuclear energy as opposed to chemical rockets. Remember, in 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster. Took a big B-29 to carry it. 1945, the first atomic bomb, a fission device, released the energy of 15,000 tons of dynamite. Not 10, 15,000. That was in 45. In 1952, we exploded our first nuclear fusion device. It released the energy of 10 million tons of dynamite. 10 million, not 10 million. And the Russians tested Tsar Bomba, which released the energy of 57 million tons of dynamite in one stinking bomb. So if you were an alien, you would recognize not only are Earthlings primitive, nasty, happy to kill, but they have the energy to get to the local galactic neighborhood stars. And if I lived there, I would be very concerned about the people here. So you have to check us out. You might say they would want to quarantine us, keep us from moving out. And it is interesting that there have been many observations of UFOs near nuclear weapons sites, where they've shut down the rockets with nuclear warheads on the top. That's happened more than once, the United States and the Soviet Union, incidentally. So what I'm saying is it makes perfect sense to me, considering our background. 2,000 nuclear weapons exploded. 50 million people killed in World War II. You got to watch out for these Earthlings. They're nasty guys. So that makes sense to me. I think every civilization out there is concerned about its own survival and security. That means looking around to see who's a threat to you. And everybody, every civilization will want to find out how its star produces its energy. We didn't find that out until 1938. We're not very advanced, and that means of doing it is nuclear fusion, which produces almost all the energy in the universe. So all the stars operate on nuclear fusion. Not some, not a few, all of them. So they would recognize that anybody who can control fusion, H-bombs as an example, could also reach the local neighborhood. And if I were in that local neighborhood, I'd be worried about the guys on this planet. Our track record is pretty poor. Every new place is a place to do battle for man. That's a sad comment.
But if they do if they do have advanced values, why don't they give us a clear message instead of watching us make mistakes? Why don't they just tell us that we are doing things incorrectly?
Would we listen? Remember, this is not a planetary society. It's a nationalistic society. Everybody's concerned about killing somebody else and being ready to do battle against somebody else. Do you think we would be willing to share what we have learned from wreckage of flying saucers, for example? Not if the Russians and Chinese don't put out what they have. So you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. I think there are some rules in the galactic community. One of them is you don't impose your will, but you certainly don't allow somebody who's nasty like us. I mean, killing 50 million people means, in one war, means we're nasty, I think, pretty straightforwardly. So I can't imagine why any advanced civilization would say, come on, guys, we'll tell you how to do this right. The first thing we do is try to grab them in their vehicles and try to use them to exert our will over the others on the planet. Isn't that the way we are?
And what are your thoughts on their ethics involved during the alien abduction process? Because there are also some reports about manipulation of memories. What do you think when it comes to ethics involved?
Yeah, I think there's no question that there are some phony stories. So what? But there's also no question there are a lot of good stories. The Betty and Barney Hill case, for example, is represented in our book Captured by Kathleen Martin and myself. She's Betty's niece. That case took place in 1961, and the data didn't come out until the mid-'60s, and then only because somebody broke a confidence. But there are a lot of abduction cases all around the planet, and they seem to be, a funny way to put it, it's a catch and release program as far as we know. So there are people who catch big fish and weigh them and then throw them back, catch and release. The aliens don't seem to be grabbing us and taking us away. I'm not saying that hasn't happened. I can't prove it hasn't happened. But almost all cases, important aspects. One, people do get taken on board craft, examined, and tossed back out. And they don't seem to be intentionally nasty to us. They don't beat up on us. They're kind to dumb animals. That's a funny way to put it, but that's what we are. And so I think some of the guys coming here are scholars. What are Earthlings? What are they like physiologically? What's wrong with them? Why are they so nasty? Maybe we check their DNA. You know, what gives with these guys? Why are they so nasty? Also, whose colony are we? Who dropped us here? Maybe we ought to talk to the boss out there, some alien says. But I think we can understand they would not want us to take our brand of friendship, which is hostility, plain and simple, out there. There's probably enough of that out there already. Remember, there's a little age problem here. Earth has been around for more than 4 billion years. The galaxy for 13 billion years. We know the history of the last few thousand years. We don't know how many civilizations there have been here over the last billion years. We don't know whether there have been wars here, many people killed. Maybe this is the devil's island of this corner of the galaxy. They dumped all the bad boys and girls here, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. Remember, the first settlers in Australia were prisoners. We weren't very nice. So we don't really have a good handle on what's going on, other than it is perfectly clear that our visitors have technology beyond ours, and they're not here to slaughter us willy-nilly. We know of no examples where aliens have come down and zapped the whole area. We might do that, but aliens don't seem to want to.
This is a hypothetical question I want to ask you. If we do make an extraterrestrial contact, what kind of relationship do you think we would have? Would it be like they just come here a few times and we are back to our own lives again, or would it be more like they would try to educate us on how it works at the galactic level?
Well, I think they would be keeping tabs on us. Once we've demonstrated that we can explode H-bombs and that our technology is rapidly changing and growing, we have all kinds of things we can do now that we couldn't do 50 years ago. Not just high-speed flight, but there are other things too, communications and all that sort of stuff. And also biologically. A lot of people can be cured of conditions today that they couldn't be cured of back 50 or 100 years ago. So I think once the die is cast, once they know we're here, and we have already demonstrated that we're nasty. I mean, I think killing 50 million people in a war is pretty nasty. I think they cannot allow us to run around and develop fusion propulsion for deep space travel and have them wait until we show up ready to say, okay, guys, it's time to give us your money or your goods or whatever. I don't think anybody can let primitives like us wander around and do things. We don't have a good track record. Look what we did to the Indians in North America. Wasn't very friendly behavior.
But does it look likely to you that we will mature up as a civilization and demonstrate that we have global unity?
Well, I'm waiting to see that. I lived through the Second World War and a few other wars since then, and I haven't seen any signs that we have decided to be peaceful, stop building weapons. The more weapons we can build, the happier we are. I'm stronger than you guys. It goes back to being kids. My father's going to beat up your father. Was the kind of thing you heard from children not too long ago. I haven't seen any signs. And yes, there's religion here, and all the religions claim to be peaceful. But there have been religious crusades, too, which are anything but peaceful. Killed as many of them as we can so we can control what they do. That's the way we are. So I don't think they could allow us to do our thing when it's so clear that within 100 years we will certainly have fusion propulsion for deep space travel and therefore be a threat to the neighborhood.
And where do you think our problem stems from mainly, that we are not able to demonstrate global unity? Is it because of the financial inequality between different countries?
Well, I think financial, but also I would say religion too. Those guys aren't like us, so we've got to be worried about them doing bad things to us. And they're saying the same thing. Those guys aren't like us, and they're bad guys. I mean, look, when the planet has a military budget this year of $1 trillion, that says it's very much concerned about warfare. Some of it defense, but also aggressive. We have thousands of nuclear weapons sitting around on this planet. All it takes is one idiot, and we've heard noises like sound of fury, terrible things will happen if those guys don't behave properly. The President of the United States has said things like that. If I were an alien, I'd worry about the people on this planet.
And when it comes to our own technology for interstellar travel, what are your thoughts on when will we achieve that, or is it even possible for us?
Oh, I have no doubt that we will achieve it if we don't destroy ourselves first. I mean, that's the limiting factor. But look, I worked on a study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel in 1962. That's a long time ago. And our conclusion was, if you want to go, all it takes is dough. Money makes the world go around. In other words, people don't realize how much money is spent on far out advanced propulsion systems. When I was working on nuclear airplanes for General Electric in 1958, our budget that year was $100 million, which was a lot of money in 1958. We employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. We're not talking about 6 professors and 12 grad students. We're talking about major effort. It was exciting to work on those programs. We tested successfully 3 different organizations, 1969 to 70, each tested a fission nuclear rocket system on the ground. Now, we're not talking about toys. I worked for Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab. Our system operated at a power level of 1,100 megawatts. Hoover Dam, which is huge, produces a power of 2,000 megawatts. Aerojet General of Sacramento developed or tested the XE-1 nuclear rocket reactor propulsion system, 1,000 megawatts. And the big granddaddy was Los Alamos, which system developed a power of 4,000 megawatts, twice the power of Hoover Dam. And the exhaust temperature, liquid hydrogen in cold and out at 4,000 degrees. Then they canceled the program. But in other words, if we want to go, we know how. It just takes money. And somebody deciding to do it.
What are your thoughts on SpaceX and their efforts for Interstellar?
Well, I certainly expect, having worked in industry and not for the government, that the real progress will come from industry and the national laboratories, not from governments. If you want to get a job done, go to a company that can build it. You want to go airplanes, you go to Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. You don't wait for the little corner mechanic. That was okay for the Wright brothers, 2 bicycle mechanics, actually. But things aren't like that anymore. So I'm satisfied we will be making progress. SpaceX will be successful. All of these things, it's kind of like Columbus had to fight to get money to make his first voyage to the New World. But when he came back with his stories, suddenly there were a lot of countries sending vehicles, ships to the New World. And flood after a while. When people find out there's gold there, for example, that's a heck of an incentive. Tens of thousands of people went from California to Alaska during the Alaska gold rush in the late 1890s. When there's a benefit to be had, the people will go. And so SpaceX may very well, as they talk about, colonize Mars. But I think to move out of our solar system is going to take more than SpaceX. I think that should be an international program, not a company. It's too big. And we went to the moon. It was a national program. I worked on that program briefly, and it was a national program. But it wasn't a planetary program. And if we're going to go to the stars, I think we have to have an Earthling program.
Yes.
And I haven't seen many signs that the countries on this planet will work together to do that. Have you? Shoot first, ask questions later. That's the Earthling motto.
And I want to understand this from your perspective. Why do you think it's important for us to become interstellar? Why not just stay here and keep making...
Well, there's several reasons. One is to be wary that somebody else might come and give us a hard time. We're not alone, in other words. Secondly, the resources of the planet are being used up very rapidly. We may need a place to go to take shelter from natural disasters. What if an asteroid hits the planet? Could kill half the population. We need another place to go, a safe haven, if you will. So it's important to be aware of the local neighborhood. I don't mean just our solar system. And, there's a popular myth. The next star over from the sun is 4.3 light years away. Oh, well, nobody's close by. Well, I mentioned there are 10,000 stars within 100 light years. Some of them have neighbors well under a light year away. And your travel is more likely to be to the nearest ones than it is to the farthest ones. So we're part of a larger picture. Now, they may have rules out there. Don't bother the idiots while they make a mess out of their planet. But at some point, when we show signs of moving out to bother them, we better be prepared that there's somebody going to say, hold it. You're not welcome out here until you demonstrate that you can obey the rules. We're a primitive society. I'm sure there are societies out there that are millions of years old. Either you learn how to get along with your neighbors or you don't survive. If you're willy-nilly killing each other, that's the end of it. So I think it's important for us because there are so many planets out there. It wasn't too many years ago, less than 100, that we could say, well, there are 9 planets in this solar system today. Some people say 8. All right. And Earth is the only one that's covered with water. It's the only one is so dense and has all these natural resources. It's got oxygen to breathe. And this is the only solar system. We're special. Well, now we know that there are planets all over the place out there, some of them much older than us. And our status is not the in charge of the neighborhood. We're the little guys on the block, the primitive guys on the block. Everybody's more advanced than we are.
And this is my own personal speculation. I feel like the ET contact is one of the very few ways that can drastically wake us up to global unity. And otherwise, it's going to take us like centuries to have that culture of global unity. What are your thoughts on that? Unless something drastic like that happens, it's it's going
I
to
don't
be?
think it'll take us centuries because now we can go around the planet. We've got men in space, 90 minutes to go around the planet, not Magellan's 3 years. That's a big difference, in other words. So I think we're not far from having to make up our minds about whether we try to talk to the alien. But I think the aliens would have rules. They only deal with planetary organization. We don't really have one. I mean, there is the United Nations, but it doesn't speak for the planets, the people on the planet, as far as I can tell. They provide certain interactions, but they don't speak for the planet. They can't. We cannot right now have an agreement between our planet and our visiting aliens that says we won't use bombs, etc. Now, what do you suppose the governments would do on this planet if the aliens said, well, we're willing to deal with you if you get rid of all your atomic bombs? How many countries would be willing to do that? I don't think any. Everybody's trying to get them. Look at North Korea. What we need is atomic bombs. We need to threaten our neighbors. That's the attitude on this planet.
And how do you see this unfolding for us? What is your vision of our journey towards becoming interstellar?
Well, somebody has to decide. Maybe Elon Musk is the guy to do it. He's talking interplanetary, not interstellar, between the stars. But that's a first step, certainly. I think that there will be a recognition that something like nuclear fusion would do the job. It's going to take big money to do it. Somebody's going to be willing to say, well, I think we should spend that money. Money is what's in the way here. All the major projects around take bucks. In World War II, we decided we were going to build atomic bombs in secret. We built a facility to separate uranium isotopes because U-235 you can use to make bombs, U-238 just heavy metal. We built a facility that was a mile long at a cost of over $1 billion, and you pump U-235 related gas through because it's a little lighter than U-238. It goes through a little faster, so it's less than 0.7% to begin with is U-235. But if you run it through this big enrichment facility and then take out what goes through and put it back in again and so forth, pretty soon you can get 90%. We spent an enormous amount of money doing that in secret. And the United States was using 5% of all the electricity produced in the United States to enrich uranium in secret. Guys didn't run for Congress and saying, this is what we want to do. Many of them probably didn't even know we were doing it, as a matter of fact. Harry Truman, as Vice President of the United States, did not know about the atomic bomb project until we exploded our first bomb. And it was 13 days later that he found out. So we are ready, willing, and able as Earthlings to put on big projects if we can justify spending the money. And there's always somebody around willing to make a case for spending money.
And for people who have never had a UFO sighting or any kind of exposure to the extraterrestrial world, why should they try to understand or educate themselves on this topic? What do you think would motivate them to know about?
Well, I think they need to know that there are nuclear weapons on this planet. We've exploded 2,000, I'm sorry, that surprises people. We've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet. I think it's important that we start thinking about, because the implications are twofold. damage. Bombs can kill people, obviously. And travel. Get us out there. New place to do business, maybe. Some people say a new place to kill. We have choices to make. So I think we need to be aware of that. And remember, when I talk about nuclear fusion, almost all the energy in the universe is produced by fusion in the stars. That's not a dream. That's the way it is. And you can use it for evil, H-bombs, or for travel, or to produce energy. And so we've got choices to make. But all of them involve have to go from a society which is run by countries to a planetary society. I can't imagine aliens in Zeta Reticuli dealing with individual countries. Who speaks for planet Earth? There isn't anybody at the moment who speaks for planet Earth. There are plenty who would volunteer to do that. So we've got some changes to be made before we can venture forth in the local galactic neighborhood.
And what are your thoughts on someone like Stephen Hawking, who has said, who has advised against it, that this could be dangerous for us to try to make a...
Well, my advice to Stephen, and I wrote an article about this years ago, is to recognize that aliens are already coming here. He says we shouldn't send out a message, and if we get a message, we shouldn't respond. It's too late for that. The aliens have been here all over the planet. It's not just once or twice. There's an ongoing presence. And so it's too late, Stephen. I'm sorry. We need to get our act together so we can respond as a planet. And turning our back on it, we don't want anything to do with this, is not the right way to move forward. I've got a great-grandson. I'd like the world he grows up in to be different from the way it is now.
And who are some of the UFO researchers that currently, whose work you respect?
Well, there are a number. Kathleen Marden, she's Betty Hill's niece. We've written 3 books together. She's very active in compiling data on, working on a chapter of a book for a big organization, data on abductions, interactions, commentary from aliens to earthlings, etc. Dr. Bruce Maccabee is an optical physicist. He's looked at more UFO pictures than anybody I know. Had a clearance for 30 years. He's written a couple of books, outstanding. John Schuessler, who headed the Mutual UFO Network for a number of years, which has collected, many people aren't aware that MUFON typically gets between 5,000 or more and more sighting reports a year. That's a lot. There's plenty going on. And once people are not as afraid to report what they have seen, there'll be a lot more. Now, governments have to decide what they're going to do about this. Do we admit to the public that, oh, yeah, we know all about these these observations and these kidnappings and abductions, whatever? There's some serious concerns here. And not talking about it doesn't give you much progress. We need to talk about it.
And what do you think about Dr. Jacques Vallée's work?
Jacques Vallée was an early pioneer in ufology, and he still is. Where we differed early on was that Jacques hadn't done his homework on interstellar travel. And it was the same problem for Alan Hynek. He can't imagine how we can get here from there. So let's forget about alien visitors, anything but. But now Jacques has recognized that we're part of a larger system. So I tell people, read his books. Read mine too, but still, read his books too. Outstanding researcher.
Why do you think so many famous astronomers have been anti-UFO?
That's a good question. I think it's because they're ignorant, frankly. There are a couple of areas. A, they haven't studied the UFO evidence. B, they have no idea how easy it is for governments to keep secrets. 3, they are not aware at all of the advanced technology that will take us to the stars. Weapons didn't get built by astronomers, by and large. And high-performance aircraft don't get built by astronomers. I'm co-author of a book, Science Was Wrong. And several of our chapters were stimulated by an astronomer saying something stupid, a smart astronomer. For example, in 1903, October, the top astronomer in the United States, Simon Newcomb, said if there was one thing he was sure of, man would never build a vehicle in which he could fly any distance. The Wright brothers' first flight was 2 months later. Another great astronomer, the British astronomer Royal, in 1956 said space travel was utter bilge. Who would spend the money? What good would it do? What we need is better tools for astronomy. Sputnik went up in 57, and the organization, the people, the professionals that benefited the most from the space program were astronomers. They don't have the, what's the word I want? Knowledge is simply, they have, I have talked to astronomers. I have debated with astronomers and won. They don't know about the UFO evidence. They don't know about interstellar travel. And they don't know about government cover-up. I've had people tell me governments can't keep things secret. After all, with the internet and all those guys involved, I talk about Operation Majestic 12. Oh, they would have certainly told their wives what they were doing. Not true. Not true at all. I'm going to pick this up and tell them I'm on an interview. Call back later. Sorry.
No.
I don't want to let it ring. So astronomers have a long history of being resistant to new ideas and of being arrogant, thinking they know what's going on. Let me try this again. Hello? I am on doing an interview. Please don't call. And it's unfortunate. Some astronomers have been willing to look at the evidence, but most have not. Don't bother. They're basic rules for debunkers. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's easier. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble. I've seen this over and over again. The easy way to see it is to look at the books by the astronomers about life in outer space and stuff. They never talk about the UFO studies. It's as if they didn't exist. If we don't look, maybe they'll go away. So, and I'll take on any of them, anytime, anywhere. The facts are what matter, not the biases, prejudices, and ignorance of people who say there's nothing to UFOs. They're flat out wrong, easy to demonstrate.
And I like your book, Science Was Wrong, for that reason, because I used to have that subconscious trust in science that if something is not true, they would tell us. But now I'm realizing that you have to do your own research.
That's right. Yes. Thank you.
And one more thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe I'm the one who is missing something on this, but it doesn't seem like there have been new updates or new insights in the UFO world. It has been the most of the... What is your thought on that?
I think you're right that there hasn't been any great change in the attitudes of professional ufologists. There aren't many of us. We don't need changes in the sense that the data is already there to convince anybody who's willing to look at it, instead of people who say, well, it can't be, therefore it isn't, and therefore I won't believe this, which is the general attitude of the noisy negativists. And as I say, I don't get a hard time from audiences, and I come on very, very strong. My conclusions are very straightforward. Some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Earth is being visited, and there is a cosmic Watergate. That is, countries aren't telling us what they know. And we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Very straightforward. Do your homework and you'll agree, is what I tell people.
And do you think this study is contributing to science in some way?
Well, yes, it's forcing scientists who are willing to take the time to reconsider their conclusions, look at the new evidence, that new in the sense that they are not aware of it. And I think the public in general, even the media, are getting better. Look, within the last 2 months, I do a monthly column for the Mutant Journal. Last month, I did about a special issue of Scientific American about life in the universe. And they're much more open about there being life out there, maybe coming here, etc. And this week, I just got, within the past week, a special issue of Newsweek magazine about life in the universe and visitations. And so my next column is going to be about that for the MUFON Journal. They don't cover everything, but they certainly have opened a lot of eyes as to what data there is, what evidence there is. And instead of theorizing about life out there, let's look at the life coming here. So I'm an optimist. I feel very good about the progress we've made in getting people to think properly.
And also, one more thing I wanted to ask you is also about, and I've noticed this both in the spiritual community as well as the disclosure community, there are always some messages about contact is going to happen now or this year, and those messages have been coming for years now. And how do you perceive that?
Well, look, the key word to me about any of these things is evidence. It's nice to say the government's going to tell us what it knows. We said that under President Carter. There were rumors in major New York Times that the government's going to tell us what it knows about flying saucers. That was a long time ago, in the late 70s. They still haven't. So proclamations just don't cut it about how aliens will behave, how we will behave, how the world is going to agree that this is sensible. There's too much standing in the way. Too many people who benefit from being powerful in a nationalistic way to say, hey, I got to worry about a planet, not a nation. So I'm still an optimist about which way things are going. And I hope my great-grandson grows up in a world in which we do think of ourselves as earthlings instead of as Americans or Canadians on both, or Germans or French or Chinese or Indian or whatever. We have some growing to do.
And I know you've been asked like tens of thousands of questions in your conferences. What is one question that you haven't been asked so far that you would love to be asked?
Oh boy. People almost never ask me, why would aliens come here? And they also, I wish to find out more about the religious community's attitudes. Many people's thinking is determined by their religious beliefs. And I think we need to have, the Pope has spoken out about, the same God who made us must have made those beings out there, which was a rather courageous statement to make. And so I'd like to see more thought being given as to how we can go from where we are, nations, to where we should be, a planet. We need more thinking about that.
What do you think will be impact on religions if the contact does happen?
Well, it'll be a mixed bag. There are people who say, well, you're telling me that Jesus didn't die for them? Of course, it may be that he did. Who knows? I think it will cause some people to re-examine their concerns about the basis of religion, the notion of God, recognizing, remember, primitive societies always talked about God's coming here. superior beings coming from someplace else. It may be that the aliens are the, the beings they've been thinking about, which is a scary concept to some, because nobody's worshiping aliens in churches, as far as I'm. Well, maybe some are, but so I think there will be a substantial impact, and that the leaders of each religious group will put together a bunch of people to try to figure out, how do we respond to this now that we know that we're not alone? Big step to take. Do we have courage enough to take it?
That reminds me of this another question, and this is also a hypothetical scenario. What if the contact does happen and a lot of people start seeing them as superior beings and idolize and worship them instead of trying to meet them as an equal?
Good question. I think it's something we have to worry about. I mean, if they land on the White House lawn, are we going to say, shoot them first? That's what we need to do. Protect us. Kill them. That's an earthling attitude. There are times we need to grow up, and this is one of them.
And what do you think would be the impact on the science? Would we have to rewrite all our science textbooks or on what it means with physics and everything?
We have to be very careful about that, because I'm sure that no aliens would give us the means for having better destructive capabilities. Here's how you can make a bigger bomb. Here's how you can kill more people. Do it with electromagnetic radiation instead of weapons. A lot cleaner, a lot faster, a lot better, more deaths per pound. We have to be careful about that. And that's really the theme in my approach, is we got to be doing more thinking and less reacting, less reflex action. They're bad guys. They want to take us over. That's always the role governments play, isn't it?
Yeah.
We got to be strong to defend against the people who want to take us over, even if they don't want to take us over. Who would want to take us over? To keep us from going out there and bothering people is one thing. To take us over, what a lot of work. How do you feed all these people? Not a non-trivial consideration.
So you are suggesting more thinking through the problem and spreading the education about it.
Yes, that's what we need.
And what would you like to see happen in the UFO community?
Well, the big thing is doing one's homework. I think we need more of the people in the UFO community to study means of propulsion to get us to the stars, to be ready to consider I'll call them historic implications. In other words, it isn't enough to say they have aliens coming here who have great flying saucers. What are we going to do about that? Are we going to learn to act sensibly? How can we convert a planet in which $1 trillion gets spent on things military in 1 year, which is what we are, to one where that money is spent to feed our kids? That's a bigger question as far as I'm concerned.
Is there a message you would like to share with the audience today?
It's a very simple message. Planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft that has implications for religion, for commerce, for trade, for our behavior as a society, certainly for government. We need to wake up and start learning about those and taking those into account. Just as we now take into account that people who have nuclear weapons are more of a threat than people who don't. So we need to recognize that our future we can't get rid of the notion that there are aliens out there and they're coming here. Like it or not, we have to learn to live with that idea, and we have to think about what we should do about it.
Thank you so much for joining today, Stanton. This is really a very special interview for me because I've learned so much from your work. It's amazing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would mention people can find me on the internet, www.stantonfriedman.com. They can find out how to get my books. I autograph all the books I send out, and my DVDs and all this stuff. No reason not to be up to date on the subject.
Are there any events or conferences you would be doing anytime soon?
Well, it's kind of funny. The first week of January, MUFON has got a cruise going. There will be about 40 people amongst a couple of thousand cruisers, where we'll go from Florida to Mexico to the Caribbean. There will be the usual Roswell event in the first week of July. It's always been a conference. It's 71 years now. Will be coming up. And the Roswell conference, well, the International UFO Museum in Roswell last year had 204,000 visitors, even though Roswell is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's literally 200 miles from Albuquerque, from El Paso, from Amarillo. But the people find their way there. So there's a whole community of people who are very interested. Check it out. The museum is well worth visiting. Also, I think all of us need to get better educated. I'm not saying buy my books. I'm saying we need to get better educated.
Yes.
Look into the matter because our future may depend on our knowledge of who's coming here.
I agree. And what we shared today hopefully takes all of us a step forward towards that knowledge.
I hope so. And I appreciate your asking your questions. Thank you.
And I want to quickly thank a couple of my viewers who contributed to some of the questions, especially Michael Worth and Kenji. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching this video. Please remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.